let's get into it right now. Just sort of bring everyone up to speed. What is happening with all of the leagues? What are the restart plans? And there are two plans right now, the bubble and the no bubble. And as we have quickly found out, the no bubble is working less well than the bubble.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say the two plans are plan and no plan. So we have NBA and NHL who have dedicated bubbles.
The NBA is at Disney World, and they've been there for 3 weeks. Well, sort of 3 weeks. They haven't let people in until they cleared coronavirus, which we think has been the Nuggets' problem. Was that basically half the team had coronavirus, including Jokic, who is the only one we know for sure had coronavirus. And so they've been like trickling in. The guys in the bubble have been swimming at pools and fishing and golfing and like having the time of their lives. They're basically like the people that can't afford to go to Disney World but can't afford the hotel. That's what they've been doing.
Yeah.
And they start playing an 8-game season starting on Saturday.
This Saturday. Yeah, well, just one thing that Bubba want to shout out to guard for the Clippers, Lou Williams, who violated quarantine by going to a strip club in Miami or Atlanta to get chicken wings. He swears he didn't go for the strippers, but the wings were alluring enough for him to break quarantine.
It was like Hooters Maximum. You go there for the wings.
Yeah.
The best part about that story to me was his friend posted an Instagram picture of him and then took the picture down and said, guys, that was an old picture.
Yeah, I just miss him. And his friend is a, I think 20-year-old white rapper who just hit the scene. It was just like, okay, that's a great little slice of 2020. There's like levity to it, but it also has real consequences for the bubble because Lou Williams was supposed to go to a funeral, and on the way to the funeral, got chicken wings at the strip club with this 20-year-old rapper. So shout out to our Nuggets who've had better behavior, but it does seem that half of the team had coronavirus at some point. There was videos of MPJ and Monte Morris at a birthday party, certainly no masks. And it was like a rich boxer's birthday party, but looked like a Westminster apartment that they were in. Like terrible ventilation, not a lot of room. But I think everyone now is like in the bubble, even if they're not fully cleared to play.
Yeah, I think that's right. My other favorite bubble story was, and I can't remember which player it was, he ordered DoorDash and crossed the street. Instead of having the DoorDash guy come to him, he crossed the street and then had to quarantine for 14 days.
Well, that's so many of those stories are getting out because they have the snitch line.
Yeah.
Where players have been calling on one another or people within the organization, which is such a huge conflict of interest. I would definitely call and say, I saw LeBron James like sharing an inhaler with someone in downtown Orlando. Because at least just have to investigate. That's going to take away at least a day or so from his practicing.
Well, in the second or third round, the Nuggets need to do that.
Yeah, right.
So the NHL is also going into a bubble system. They've been doing training camp. The Avs had been here. And now they're heading to Edmonton, which is where the West is playing their games. It's a 24-team tournament. The Avs are going to play 3 round-robin games against the Blues, the Golden Knights, and the Stars. And whoever does the best in those 3 games will get the first seed in the West. So it's a battle for the 4 seeds. And then all the other teams, the other 8 teams in the West, are playing best-of-5 series. And the teams that win those series will then play the top 4 teams. And then we go into a regular Stanley Cup bracket.
Appreciate we have Disney World on one end and then Edmonton on the other. I've had beef. I forgot my beef with Edmonton. But actually, I just have to thank the city for hosting the NHL nonetheless. But it's funny that the NHL's bubble system is equally as complicated as their drafting system. But I think we have the most hope that the NHL will work out.
Yeah, partially because they went to Canada, and keeping Canada's priorities straight, they refused to let the Blue Jays come back and play home games in Toronto. But they are hosting 12 NHL teams in Toronto as we speak, and the Blue Jays had to move to Buffalo. Like, they were like, we do not care what you think. We're going to send you to arguably known as the worst sports city other than Cleveland in the United States to play your games.
Well, I really would love to see a Blue Jays mafia get born out of the Buffalo fandoms. Like, you can't go in the stadium, but I hope they're still jumping through tables to support their new short-term hometown team.
Well, and that brings us to Major League Baseball, who at one point were talking about bubbles at their spring training locations and threw that out because the players were like, we can't handle it. They're playing a 60-game season, which is equivalent basically to the number of days that the NHL and NBA players who go to the finals will be playing. And they're going to let 16 teams in the playoffs. So this is the hope for the Rockies. They're going to let 2 teams from each division make the playoffs and then 2 wildcard teams for each league. So the hope for the Rockies is the Dodgers get number 1 and somehow the Rockies get the number 2 spot or are good enough of the rest of the pool, which seemed crazy, but after 3 games, like really kept it together. And with the way that things are going, 3 games is 5% of their schedule. So, unfortunately, the Rockies were fine in Toronto, or I'm sorry, in the Rangers, Texas and Toronto, easy to confuse. But the Miami Marlins went into Philadelphia and just had a COVID party, basically. It was just as bad as what those rumors we've heard about in Texas. They are up to 17 people with the team that have COVID. It started with 1 player on Friday. No one knew about it. Then on Sunday, they had 3 players, and were like, we're going to play. What's the worst that could happen? Now 17 people within the organization have COVID. It has caused the cancellation of their 2-game series against the Baltimore Orioles, and Philadelphia is having to quarantine because they were supposed to play the Yankees, but they hosted the Marlins, and they're worried about getting COVID.
Wait. So they knew a player was sick on Friday, played the series, knowing that by Sunday 3 other people had it.
They were not letting those people play.
Oh.
But basically, from what the experts have said, 3 people means that you have an outbreak. And because of the way that COVID works, you're not going to see the results of who has it for 3 to 5 days, in some cases 7 days. So the guy on Friday, if he gives it to everybody else, it's going to take maybe up to a week to know who he gave it to. And then those people are all giving it to people. So baseball is in this place where the bubble, they had no bubble, they had no plan. Like, there was no threshold to if 4 players get it, you have to cancel the game, which is how they ended up playing that game on Sunday. And these reports keep coming out that the Phillies don't have any positive tests, but we're still 4 to 5 days away from knowing for sure.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, baseball is trying to start playing games maybe this week, because if you lose a whole week, that's a 10th of your season.
And it's like that dominoes. I think the way their season is set up, that East Coast teams are only playing East Coast teams.
Yeah, so it would take out it could take out the whole American League East and National League East because of this, but that would still leave the Central and the West in both leagues.
Mm-hmm.
But Miami, and we all know there are a lot of problems with Miami just in general. They're not a good team to begin with.
I thought you meant the city.
Yeah.
itself.
Well,
there's
yeah.
there's layers to peel back on that.
And then, but they didn't even make it a weekend. They hadn't even done travel yet. It's really bad news, and it's something that the other 2 non-bubble sports that we cover have to be worried about. So the NFL is starting training camp today. But training camp today means working out for the next few weeks, and then they're going to have 28 days of regular organized team activities, no preseason, and then they're just going to go about their life as if nothing has happened.
And to the point, training camp, this is the most Broncos players in the same place since the end of the season. And
Since they almost blew that game to the Raiders.
Yeah. Ugh. Life was so much easier back then. And I know that they're doing testing, but it's not we may not even get a week into training camp without an outbreak somewhere, which is going to slow things down. And the NFL schedule isn't quote unquote quarantined in terms of
It's actually the opposite.
region.
Sometimes the training camps, they force players to stay at a hotel. And they said you can't force people to stay at a hotel this year. And so the Broncos are wearing tracking wristbands. So they'll be able to know who they've come within 6 feet of in case they get COVID. But it's 80 guys in the locker room. They cut the roster down from 90, plus all of the team personnel. And, Vic Fangio, basically the oldest first-time head coach of all time, someone you worry about. And, also for the Broncos, this is a bad situation. They're going to have no preseason games, and they have an entirely new offense coming back with Drew Lock and a bunch of receivers that he's never been on the field with before.
I told my dear friend Ryan, who is now a prophet of fantasy football. He listens to fantasy football podcasts in the off season, which is so weird to me. I told him, enjoy those 4 games because there's no way the NFL is getting through an entire season, at least not week in, week out.
Well, and that, to me, I think that they need to quickly change to some sort of bubble model. And I've come up with 2 ideas for this off the top of my head. The first one is you would have, so let's say you get the whole AFC West together, have them play their 6 games, and then swap the teams out. So then have the Broncos go with the Colts and the Titans and some, well, it can't be the Titans, but have them go with 4 teams outside, have them bubble for a few weeks, play all of their games, and try to mismatch the schedule together. But so have mini bubbles and then have time off in between. The second idea I have is just put 8 teams together, have them play everybody twice, and that gives you a 14-game season. I don't think they're going to do either of those, but a full bubble is really hard. That's 3,200 people, basically, that would have to be in the bubble.
Yeah. NFL staffs are just so huge that, the NBA had to cleave part of their personnel to travel.
And that was just because Disney hotel rates are really expensive.
But the NFL has endless amounts of money, but it seems that they haven't, the most precautions they've seemed to take are these wristbands, and they're prototyping these face guards for the face masks, which I feel that could have always existed for one, but it certainly doesn't. Well, and then thinking today, players are already opting out. I know one Bronco has, but 6 Patriots players have.
Yeah, which has just spurred controversy because Taylor Lawrence is going to be out. Is it Taylor? Trevor Lawrence is going to be out after this season, who is the long-haired prodigy son that seems like he could be the next Tom Brady.
Great, but also the NCAA football ain't happening now. So
so that's our 5th sport.
Oh yeah.
Yes. As of right now, the big conferences have, for the most part, canceled any non-conference games. So the Rocky Mountain Showdown is dead, and it's not coming back for a few years at least. It was supposed to be at CSU this year. This was supposed to be revenge for the time that CSU beat CU on their home court or their home field when I was a freshman, rushed the field. This was going to be our redemption game. It's gone.
That is so disrespectful. I love it.
And so the Pac-12 is thinking about playing a 10-game season. They currently have 9 opponents on the schedule. The Buffs would add a 10th team, Oregon State, and play a 10-game season. Also, really unlikely, especially when you think about the Pac-12 having 2 Arizona schools, 4 California schools, a school in Seattle. This is...
Well, I was watching Real Sports, and they were interviewing the commissioner of the SEC, which, the South has been ablaze with corona for the past several weeks, and how he was unwilling to share how many players had tested positive, where, at LSU, I think, 30 members of the team tested positive, and it's such a huge controversy because so many schools are going remote for the first semester, but they're bringing in their football players because how much money football earns these schools.
Who are still essentially unpaid labor.
Yeah. They're children.
And I will say, CU has a new head coach, Carl Durrell, so you're like, this is going to be hard. But Mel Tucker, former CU coach, he had a COVID outbreak at Michigan State, and they had to quarantine the whole football team for 14 days this week. So, could be worse.
Remember when that was the biggest problem?
I know.
That was the most upsetting thing to happen is when Mel Tucker betrayed the CU football team.
I think that was the last really upsetting thing that happened before all of this just fell apart. Like
Yeah.
that and the outdoor game and all of the parking problems.
How good we had it.
So that's sort of what the bubbles look like. But and people are saying, like, everyone's being so negative, like, everyone wants to see this fail. We don't want to see this fail. We want all of this to work. But hope is not a strategy, as Sandy Clough once said about the Rockies. And that seems to be the baseball plan and the football plans.
Yeah, I'm like, really, the episode that has been 2020 has been so much that I just don't want to see a shit show. Right now, I have a less than 1% belief that the NFL season is going to play out in its entirety in the time frame that it's supposed to. And so from that, I want to avoid that chaos because we're moving into election season. And we'll talk next week about like the politics that has been injected into sports and how kind of that's always been a thing. But I don't want any more mess. If like the election is to be a terrible spectacle, I want sports to be a refuge. But if like 15 of my favorite players have COVID and they have to shut down games and there's exposés on how terrible this was, that would break me in a way that I'm just not ready for.
And I think Cricket the dog agrees with you. 'Cause
Yeah.
she's just going crazy in the background. Well, let's move on for now. We'll be back. This will not be the last time we talk about COVID. That's for sure.